on May 10, 1940. The first glider-borne assault in history was conducted by German combat engineers against the world's strongest fortress at Eben Emael in Belgium. Despite installing powerful guns and heavy armor, the Belgians neglected to build adequate defenses on the roof of the fortress. It was there that just 9 flimsy fabric-covered gliders landed and disgorged 71 highly trained German paratroopers who attacked the gun emplacements. The armored cupolas were destroyed by using a new type of explosive in the form of hollow charge weapons. In less than 30 minutes, the commanding gun emplacements of Fort Eben Emael were neutralized. The next day, the fortress surrendered, and the gateway into Belgium and France was open. The fall of what was to have been an unbeatable fortress caused a disaster for Belgium for the second time in a generation.
You are at stop number 1 of the tour of Fort Eben Emael. Listen to the information presented and enjoy your visit to this wonderful historic site, Fort Eben Emael. You should access this stop as you are standing in the parking lot. As you listen to the information, feel free to explore the 3 sites in this area. First, take a look at the fort sign. This will allow you to get your bearings for the walk on top of St. Peter's Hill and visiting the fort emplacements. As well, you can visit the 2 memorial sites located on both sides of the road leading up to Block 1. Block 1 is the main entrance to the underground area of the fort. This tour will take 90 minutes, and you will access 15 stops that will familiarize you with the events of May 10, 1940, and events that led up to this fateful day. This tour can be dangerous if you're careless, so be careful when climbing around the emplacements, which can be 5 to 15 meters high. You can climb on top at your own risk. You will be following a well-worn trail, but the path can be muddy and slippery when wet. You will be walking through and next to farmers' fields. Respect the owner's property by staying on the trail. This is an historic site, so do not litter and leave the emplacements the way you find them. Be responsible. This audio tour is in no way meant to glorify or justify war. One only has to visit Dachau or Belsenbergen or Dresden to realize the immense scope of suffering that existed during World War II, or for that matter any conflict, whether global or regional. But history is what it is, an intersection of time, place, and people. Fort Eben Emael is such an intersection. A time when, for better or worse, men fought for purpose, country, comrades, or their own personal survival. And this multimedia tour is an attempt to describe those intersecting events. Now, the story of Fort Eben Emael. You are presently standing in the parking lot area of Fort Eben Emael. Let's start by getting our bearings as to where we are. Look towards the most obvious structure. That is, the cement blockhouse located into the hill. This is Block 1, and one of our stops on the tour. But before that, listen to the story of Fort Eben Emael. You can almost hear the rustle of leaves through the trees, and off to your right, over the blockhouse, you can hear the wind whistling as you see a glider swoop in from the south and rise up over the hill and disappear. You can also see several gliders circling and descending to the top of the hill. It is hard to make them out as it is early morning, 5:25 on May 10, 1940. Before May 10th, there had been rumblings of war throughout the winter months, as some would refer to this time as the Phony War, but not on this day. The war for Western Europe was about to become a part of history. The British and French had declared war on Germany in September of 1939 after the invasion of Poland. That was 9 months ago, and now everyone expected the German invasion of Western Europe, but when it would come or from what direction were the big questions of the day. And here stood Fort Eben Emael. This impressive fort, by many military experts, was thought to be impregnable. The construction of the fort had finished in 1935 after 5 years of construction. It was to be part of a string of forts that circled Liège, located just south of here some 40 kilometers. These forts were built to protect Belgium's eastern border from invasion. Fort Eben Emael was the jewel in the crown of these forts. Its main purpose was to protect the river crossings of the Albert Canal that we will see later in the walk. The big guns could also support infantry units in the field, as the guns could fire for more than 13 miles up and down the eastern side of Belgium. But Fort Eben Emael was out of date even before it was finished. It had been built from the lessons of the First World War, where static defense proved to be so devastating in the trench warfare of Flanders and northern France. Not in the time of mechanization and the new German battle doctrine to become known as blitzkrieg. The Germans had shown this new form of warfare in Poland when tanks and mechanized troops allowed for unprecedented mobility on the battlefield. Poland had entered the war with horse-mounted cavalry, which offered little defense and attack advantages against the modern tank. As with World War I, Belgian military doctrine expected the forts along their border to hold up any German advance. The kind of advance the Germans had been so successful in executing in the early part of World War I. In World War I, the Germans had attacked across the plains of Belgium, leading to the French and English armies marching north to meet the German invasion. This had eventually led to a stalemate, which in World War I would lead to 4 years of incredibly savage trench warfare where millions perished. Though modified several times, the Germans eventually decided that the attacks would sweep through Holland and Belgium. This time would only be a feint. The initial attack would look like the Wehrmacht would again pursue an attack much like they attempted in World War I. And the Germans hoped for the same reaction from the Allies. They would sweep north from the French border and meet the Germans in Belgium, blunting their attack. The French had expected this plan of attack and had built their defense doctrine around the plan for the coming battles. They, too, had expected a war like the Great War and had built the mighty Maginot Line of forts that extended from the Swiss border to the Ardennes and Belgian border. Most of their mobile troops had been placed on the Belgian border, expecting to move north when the war came. The Maginot Line would be the anchor and fulcrum as the French, British, and Belgian forces met the German advance, and Fort Eben Emael was expected to delay the attacks through the border areas. This would allow the Allies time to create a defensive line able to repel the Germans. But Hitler had a different plan for the next European war. The Germans planned a feint attack across the border through Belgium, where the British and French would follow their plan of marching north into Belgium. The Germans, on the other hand, had massed their tanks along the Ardennes, and as the Allies took the bait, the main German armored force would strike between the Maginot Line and the advancing troops into Belgium. Blitzkrieg punched a hole in the Allied lines, and the Germans swept in behind the Allies, cutting them off from their supply line and trapping the Allied armies. This led eventually to the Allies retreating to Dunkirk and the miraculous evacuation of the beaches that were to take place there. And when the battles were all over, Germany occupied all of Western Europe except for England, which was to stand alone against the German attempt to create the 1,000-Year Reich. The times they were a-changin', but the hope that the mighty fort at Eben Emael would delay or stem the tide of German advance was to prove a fateful error. Much of the German plan that day hinged on pushing through the Liège forts to encourage the Allies to mount a counteroffensive and offensive actions in Belgium that would leave the back door, as they say, open for the Germans to spring the trap. Taking the Liège forts, in particular Fort Eben Emael, was a top priority if the German plans were to work. The speed with which Eben Emael fell and how the raid was executed was symptomatic of how devastating blitzkrieg could be. It is now time to move on to Stop 2. Proceed to Block 1, the main entrance, and then walk to your right and up to the fence. This field is usually occupied by a variety of farm animals. You can begin to listen to Stop 2 as you walk towards the farmer's field, or wait until you reach the fence.